Generations of struggle. A century of resistance against tyranny. An era of great valor, a spell of immense sacrifice. Until on the 15th of August 1947, India broke free from the shackles of the British rule. And the dream of freedom was finally realized. At the stroke of midnight, the leader of the Indian National Congress, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, took his oath as the first Prime Minister of independent India and addressed the nation with a speech that captured the essence and emotion of the freedom struggle.
We made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge. Not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
Every person virtually was out on the streets till late in the night, doing nothing but just aimlessly moving around shouting Jai Hind, Vande Mataram. And parks, tram tracks, tramways were, tram cars were full. People were just moving around, celebrating. It was as if a new dawn has come.
Born into a politically active family on the 14th of November 1889 in Allahabad, Jawaharlal Nehru studied law in England, and after practicing as a barrister for a few years in Allahabad, he joined the Indian National Congress in 1919. A rising political figure marked for high office by Gandhi, Nehru would soon become the president of the Congress and play a key role in negotiations over independence. After reluctantly giving in to the Muslim League's insistence on partition, 1947 would see Jawaharlal Nehru being sworn in as the first Prime Minister of a free India by Lord Mountbatten, the last Viceroy of British India. And thereafter, till his last breath, he would lead the nation, becoming the longest-serving Prime Minister of the country till date.
Nehru had the capacity to reach out to the people. He toured the country, the length and breadth of the country, and he participated in the nationalist movement. And I think it was a great asset for him to have been chosen as Mahatma Gandhi as his heir in the Congress party. So Nehru had all these assets, he had all these advantages, and he was a thoughtful man and a reflective man. And a very civilized man. I would like to point out that Nehru wrote a great deal. He was a man who had great respect for scholarship and particularly for science. Nehru had a youthful quality about him even then, and it's this youthful quality which appealed to younger people in the first years of independence.
Under the leadership of Nehru, India witnessed a series of triumphs and defeats post-independence. Though the air those days was filled with the sweet fragrance of freedom, post-partition sectarian clashes and terrorist attacks claimed the lives of more than 1 million. The father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, was assassinated on the 30th of January 1948, leaving an entire nation distraught.
मेरा दिल दर्द से भरा हुआ है, ज़बान चलती नहीं है। आज का अवसर भारतवर्ष के लिए बड़ा दुख, शोक और शर्म का है। बजे मैं उनके पास गया था और 1 घंटे तक मैंने बात की। वो घड़ी निकाल के मुझको कहने लगे कि मेरा प्रार्थना का समय हो गया है, अब मुझको जाने दीजिए।
The Constitution of India, drafted by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, came into power on the 26th of January 1950 and India became a republic. 1950 also saw the first step towards the biggest event in the largest democracy of the world. The first election commission was set up under the charge of Sukumar Sen, and democratic India was ready to choose its leader.
Election Commission did a wonderful job at that time. As a matter of fact, that is why the Election Commission of that time was called in by other countries to provide guidelines for conducting elections in some of the African countries. So Election Commission at that time, led by Mr. Sukumar Sen, they did a wonderful job. They did a wonderful job indeed. Of course, politics was not then polluted so much, and it was easier for them to handle the situation.
Nehru took on the spirit and the mantle of Mahatma Gandhi and made sure that it stayed over India. No one went as far as Nehru did in every aspect of governance and his interactions with people to reintegrate the Muslims who had stayed behind in India, 1/3 of the Muslims of the subcontinent, and whose lives had been torn apart by partition. He went out of his way to bring in and create a new Muslim elite.
The first general elections were held from the 21st of October 1951 to the 21st of February 1952. In 401 constituencies representing the 26 Indian states. It was the biggest experiment in the history of democracy anywhere in the world. Over 2,24,000 polling booths equipped with over 2.5 million steel ballot boxes were constructed across the country. Nearly 620 lakh ballot papers were printed and 1 million officials supervised the conduct of the polls. As 173 million Indians cast their vote.
The first general elections which were held in India in 1951-52 under the leadership of Jawaharlal Nehru were really very unique, not just in the history of this country, but I think in history anywhere, because such a large number of people, and especially poor and illiterate people, had been enfranchised for the first time. This kind of a leap of faith had not been taken by any other country. Such faith that people who may be unlettered and poor yet could have the wisdom to choose a government that would be able to run this very complex country. This was the heritage of our freedom struggle, which had been fought by these millions of very ordinary Indians, and it was a faith in them that if they could have fought the war for freedom, then surely they had the right now to run their own affairs. So there was an excitement of an extraordinary kind in these first general elections.
Before India went to the polls, two former cabinet colleagues of Nehru established separate political parties and challenged the Indian National Congress's supremacy. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee went on to found the Jana Sangh, and Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar formed the Scheduled Caste Federation, later named the Republican Party of India. Apart from these, there were over 50 smaller parties who stood for the first general election. But it was the Indian National Congress who reigned supreme and swept 364 of the 489 seats and 45% of the votes polled. And Nehru became the first democratically elected Prime Minister of India.
It's a cliche to say he was an outstanding leader, which he was, one of the greatest leaders the world has seen, the 20th century saw. There's no question about it. He was a visionary. Whether you share his vision or not share his vision, that's a different matter, but he had a vision for India. I think he was a tolerant, civilized human being, extremely well-read and educated. I think that was a very major thing. He knew not only educated, but an erudite scholar. He knew Indian history. He knew India's background, India's culture. That's a very important thing. He realized the value of democracy, which is also an important thing. And therefore, the character of the first Prime Minister, in many ways, had a very powerful impact on the initial stages of Indian politics.
He was actually very unhappy that the elections were delayed by a year or so because of the mammoth task of enlisting the voters, organizing the elections, I said never before had such an election exercise ever been carried out anywhere in the world. But he wanted it quicker because he had such faith in the people that all this turmoil that India is going through will get resolved if people can express their wishes through the ballot.
The first Lok Sabha was constituted on the 17th of April 1952 and lasted its full term to the 4th of April 1957. Led by Jawaharlal Nehru, India would tread on the path of growth and development. He would advocate democratic socialism and secularism, promote rapid industrialization and technological advancement. And it was under his leadership that the government would implement the first 5-year plan in 1951, focusing on agricultural growth.
Within India, I think the economic regeneration which he started to build an independent economy from a devastated colonial economy, that was a great job which he tried to do through the planning, the different plans by setting up the planning commission. Then just visualizing a modern, new, democratic India, building the institutions that were needed. Nehru's vision was that because we were poor, we could not sacrifice higher education, technical education, scientific education, high culture. He set up the Lalit Kala Academy, the Sahitya Academy, the National School of Drama, the National Film Institute. You name it, and all these institutions, the IITs, the IIMs, the science establishments, space research, all this is set up by Nehru at a phase when we did not have money to throw around.
On the one hand, India was making progress, but on the other, linguistic barriers created turmoil within the country. And the 1st of November 1956 saw Andhra Pradesh emerge as the first linguistic state of India. Then came the historic general elections of 1957. That saw the Indian National Congress replicate its 1952 success story, and winning 371 of the 490 seats, Jawaharlal Nehru was re-elected as the Prime Minister of India.
They voted for the Congress. They voted for him because he was Congress. At that time there was no cult, personality cult. There was no television. There was very little. The reach of the newspapers was very limited. And the radio was all that you had. And yes, his voice was well known on the radio. And he was an iconic figure by 1956-57. The contact was with the Congress. And the Congress had a very deep roots. The Congress began as a mass party. It had people in every village, and that inheritance lasted them for quite a long time. I think for almost 20 years.
In his second term, Nehru heralded the development of the core industries in India with an impetus on scientific and economic growth.
The growth of science in India is very welcome to me, and insofar as I am concerned, I believe that the government of India will encourage this growth of science in the future as it has been doing in the past.
He would also put India on the global map with his international strategies, foreign policy doctrine and adoption of the non-aligned policy. But in 1962, when Nehru initiated the forward policy and set up outposts along the McMahon Line, the Chinese troops attacked some of these outposts and thus began the infamous Indochina War, one that remains India's most ignominious defeat till date.
I think he had not been very wise or prudent in his dealings with the Chinese. He trusted them, and he believed that they betrayed his trust. I think he was misled by Mr. Krishna Menon, and he paid the price for it. He paid the price for it. But he should have been more prudent, more cautious. And it's not that all the fault lies on the Chinese side. We also made demands and took many things for granted. And so it was a messy affair.
It was then that Nehru came under the scanner and received criticism for his government's insufficient attention to defense. However, even after the India-Sino debacle, his popularity remained unfazed. And in the 1962 general elections, he became the Prime Minister for the third time in a row.
There was a lot of sympathy that he had, tried so hard. He had done so much for China, spoken up in international fora for them, in the UN, everywhere, for seat on the Security Council, and yet they had betrayed. So the sense was that he had been betrayed. He was a victim, he was not seen as a villain.
(1963) saw a decline in Nehru's health and he was forced to spend months recuperating in Kashmir. However, upon his return from Kashmir on the 27th of May 1964, Jawaharlal Nehru would succumb to a heart attack. And the light that once led India to freedom and development would fade away, marking the end of an era.